I found myself standing in what remained of the Whitmore farmhouse cellar on a cold December morning in 1889, 44 years after the events that would forever change how I understood the boundaries between life and death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wooden floorboards above had rotted away decades ago, but the stone foundation still held secrets that made my hands tremble as I held the lantern higher. Scattered across the dirt floor were 3 identical wooden coffins, each bearing the name of one of the Whitmore triplets. Yet when we opened them just hours before, every single casket was completely empty. My name is Dr. Samuel Hartwell, and I have spent the better part of my career investigating unexplained phenomena throughout the Ohio Valley. I have examined cases of supposed hauntings, mysterious disappearances, and strange occurrences that defy rational explanation. Nothing in my 25 years of research prepared me for what I discovered in the small farming community of Cedar Hollow, Ohio, where 3 sisters managed to blur the lines between the living and the dead in ways that challenge everything we understand about human existence. The winter of 1845 brought unprecedented hardship to the rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, where small farming communities struggled against harsh weather that lasted well into April. Cedar Hollow sat nestled between 2 wooded ridges about 30 miles southeast of Zanesville, connected to the outside world by a single dirt road that became impassable during heavy rains or snow. The community consisted of perhaps 40 families who had settled the area during the 1820s, drawn by fertile soil and abundant timber that promised prosperity for those willing to work the land. Thomas Whitmore had established his farm on the eastern edge of Cedar Hollow in 1823, clearing 80 acres of dense forest to create fields suitable for corn, wheat, and vegetables that could sustain his growing family. His wife Margaret bore him 6 children over 12 years, but tragedy struck their household repeatedly as 4 of their offspring succumbed to various childhood diseases that claimed so many young lives on the frontier. Only their 3 daughters survived to adulthood, and these girls would become the center of events that transformed Cedar Hollow from a peaceful farming community into a place whispered about in fearful tones throughout southeastern Ohio. Whitmore triplets were born during a violent thunderstorm on October 13, 1821, an event that local midwife Hannah Peterson would later describe as the most unsettling birth she had ever attended. Margaret Whitmore's labor began normally during the early afternoon, but as the storm intensified outside, strange circumstances began to develop inside the farmhouse. Each child was born exactly 1 hour apart, despite medical knowledge suggesting that multiple births typically occurred within minutes of each other. More disturbing was the fact that each infant appeared to be completely lifeless at birth, showing no signs of breathing or heartbeat for several minutes before suddenly beginning to cry with remarkable strength and vitality. Hannah Peterson, who had delivered over 200 babies during her career, later told neighbors that she had never experienced anything like the Whitmore births. The first child, whom they named Sarah, remained motionless and pale for nearly 3 minutes after delivery before suddenly gasping and beginning to breathe normally. The second daughter, Rebecca, showed no vital signs for almost 4 minutes, leading Hannah to believe the child had been stillborn, when the infant suddenly opened her eyes and began crying lustily. The third sister, Rachel, appeared dead for so long that Hannah had begun preparing to inform the parents of their loss when the child abruptly came to life with such force that her cries could be heard over the thunder outside. The storm that accompanied their birth was itself unusual for October in Ohio, featuring lightning strikes that seemed to cluster on the Whitmore property and thunder that continued for hours without the typical patterns of moving weather systems. Several neighbors later reported that the lightning appeared to have a strange greenish tint, unlike anything they had observed during previous storms. and that the thunder seemed to echo from underground rather than from the sky above. Trees struck by lightning that night did not burn as expected, but instead turned completely white and remained standing like ghostly sentinels around the farmhouse. As the triplets grew from infancy into childhood, their parents and neighbors began to notice peculiarities that set them apart from other children in Cedar Hollow. The three girls were absolutely identical in appearance, sharing the same pale blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and delicate features that made distinguishing between them nearly impossible. More unsettling was their tendency to speak in unison, often completing each other's sentences or responding to questions, as if they shared a single mind distributed across three bodies. They rarely played with other children, preferring to spend their time together in activities that seemed unusually sophisticated for their age. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By the time the triplets reached 10 years old, strange events began occurring around the Whitmore farm that defied rational explanation. Neighbors reported seeing lights moving through the fields during the middle of the night, not the steady glow of lanterns carried by people, but dancing illuminations that seemed to move with intelligence and purpose. Livestock on surrounding farms began behaving erratically, with cattle refusing to graze in fields adjacent to the Whitmore property, and horses becoming agitated whenever they were led past the farmhouse. Several farmers reported finding their animals arranged in perfect circles in their pastures, standing motionless and staring toward the Whitmore farm until dawn broke the spell. The local Methodist minister, Reverend Joshua Coleman, became increasingly concerned about the spiritual atmosphere in Cedar Hollow as reports of unusual phenomena continued to accumulate. During his weekly visits to the Whitmore household, he observed that the triplets seemed to anticipate his arrival before he came into view, often gathering at the front window to watch for his approach along the road. When he attempted to conduct Bible readings or lead prayers, the girls would stare at him with an intensity that made him profoundly uncomfortable, and on several occasions, he noticed that they seemed to be mouthing different words than those he was speaking, as if conducting their own silent religious service alongside his efforts. Margaret Whitmore confided to several neighbor women that her daughters had begun displaying knowledge and abilities that seemed impossible for children their age. The girls could predict weather changes days in advance with perfect accuracy, often preparing for storms or cold snaps before any visible signs appeared in the sky. They demonstrated an uncanny ability to locate lost objects, not just within their own household, but throughout the community, often directing neighbors to missing tools, livestock, or personal items without ever having seen them before. Most disturbing was their apparent knowledge of events occurring in distant locations, sharing detailed information about happenings in Zanesville or other towns that they could not possibly have learned through normal communication. During the winter of 1835, when the triplets were 14 years old, the first truly inexplicable incident occurred that would establish the pattern for increasingly strange events over the following decade. Samuel Mitchell, a neighboring farmer, reported that his prize bull had escaped from its pen during a blizzard and wandered into the deep woods, where it would certainly freeze to death before morning. Despite the dangerous weather conditions and the impossibility of tracking the animal in heavy snow, the three Whitmore sisters appeared at his door just after midnight, offering to help locate the missing bull. The girls led Samuel and several other men directly through the woods to a clearing nearly 2 miles from his farm, where they found the bull standing peacefully beside a small fire that appeared to have been burning for hours despite the heavy snowfall. The animal showed no signs of distress or cold, and the fire continued burning steadily even though no fuel was visible nearby, and the falling snow should have extinguished any normal flame. When the men attempted to investigate the source of the fire, they found only a small circle of bare earth that remained warm to the touch, with no evidence of wood, coal, or any other combustible material that could explain the sustained flame. More disturbing was the fact that the triplets seemed to know exactly where to find the bull, despite having no logical way to track its movements through the storm. And during the entire rescue operation, they remained perfectly warm and dry, while the men accompanying them suffered from the bitter cold and accumulating snow. Several witnesses later reported that the girls appeared to be walking slightly above the snow rather than through it, leaving no footprints despite the deep accumulation that made travel difficult for everyone else in the group. As the triplets entered their late teenage years, their unusual abilities became more pronounced and began to attract attention from beyond Cedar Hollow. Travelers passing through the area brought stories about the Whitmore sisters to other communities, describing young women who could heal sick animals with a touch, predict future events with startling accuracy, and communicate with each other across impossible distances. Some visitors came seeking help with problems that conventional medicine or traditional solutions could not address, and many left convinced that they had encountered something beyond normal human experience. Dr. Elias Thornton, a physician from Zanesville who had studied at medical schools in Philadelphia and Boston, visited Cedar Hollow in 1840 specifically to investigate reports about the triplets' healing abilities. His detailed journal, which I discovered during my own investigation, documented several instances where the sisters successfully treated conditions that should have been beyond the scope of frontier medical knowledge. A child suffering from severe pneumonia recovered completely after the triplets spent one evening at his bedside, despite Dr. Thornton's professional assessment that the boy was likely to die within hours. An elderly woman who had been bedridden for months with a painful joint condition was able to walk normally after a brief visit from the sisters, with no medical explanation for her sudden improvement. Most significantly, Dr. Thornton observed the triplets working together to help a young mother who was experiencing a difficult childbirth that threatened both her life and that of her unborn child. The sisters arrived at the cabin without being summoned, somehow knowing that their assistance was needed, and they guided the delivery using techniques that Dr. Thornton had never encountered in his formal medical training. The mother and child both survived what should have been a fatal situation, and Dr. Thornton noted in his journal that the healing process seemed to involve some form of energy transfer between the triplets and their patients that he could observe, but not understand or explain. The growing reputation of the Whitmore sisters began to create tension within Cedar Hollow as some community members became uncomfortable with the attention their unusual abilities attracted. Reverend Coleman expressed increasing concern about what he perceived as supernatural influences that might be contrary to Christian teachings, and several families began to avoid social contact with the Whitmore household. The isolation seemed to affect the triplets' behavior as they became more withdrawn from community activities and spent increasing amounts of time in private pursuits that neighbors found mysterious and unsettling. During the spring of 1843, construction workers building a new road through Cedar Hollow discovered what appeared to be an ancient burial ground on a hillside overlooking the Whitmore farm. The site contained several dozen stone markers arranged in perfect geometric patterns, with symbols carved into the rocks that no one in the community could identify or interpret. Local folklore suggested that the area had once been inhabited by indigenous peoples, but the stone markers showed no resemblance to known Native American burial practices in the region. The discovery of the burial ground seemed to coincide with an intensification of the strange phenomena surrounding the triplets. Neighbors reported that the lights moving through the fields at night became more frequent and more visible, sometimes appearing in formations that suggested organized patterns or deliberate communication. The sounds of voices singing in harmony could be heard drifting from the direction of the Whitmore farm during the early morning hours, though the melodies were unlike any hymns or folk songs familiar to the community. More troubling were reports that the triplets had begun to be seen in multiple locations simultaneously, appearing to different people at the same time in places that were too far apart for normal travel. Sarah was observed helping with a difficult farm task on the western edge of Cedar Hollow, while Rebecca was simultaneously seen gathering herbs in the woods to the east, and Rachel was reported to be visiting a sick neighbor to the south, all during the same afternoon when it would have been impossible for them to travel between these locations. The mystery deepened when several community members began reporting encounters with the triplets during times when the sisters were known to be elsewhere or engaged in other activities. These sightings always involved helpful actions, such as warning of dangerous conditions, providing assistance during emergencies, or offering comfort to people experiencing difficulties, but witnesses consistently described feeling that something was fundamentally different about these encounters compared to normal interactions with the sisters. As 1845 approached, the phenomena surrounding the Whitmore triplets intensified to a degree that would culminate in events so extraordinary that they would challenge everything the community of Cedar Hollow understood about the nature of life, death, and human existence. The stage was set for discoveries that would prove some mysteries transcend the boundaries of scientific explanation and venture into realms where the impossible becomes terrifyingly real. The winter of 1845 arrived with an intensity that tested the resolve of every family in Cedar Hollow. Snow began falling in early November and continued with only brief interruptions through February, creating drifts that reached the second story windows of most farmhouses. The bitter cold penetrated even the most well-constructed homes, and several families were forced to abandon their outlying cabins to seek shelter with neighbors whose dwellings offered better protection against the harsh elements. During this particularly brutal season, the behavior of the Whitmore triplets underwent a transformation that would prove to be the beginning of events that defied every natural law I had previously understood. Margaret Whitmore confided to her closest neighbor, Elizabeth Porter, that her daughters had begun rising every morning precisely at 4 o'clock, regardless of the weather conditions or their activities from the previous day. The three sisters would dress silently and leave the farmhouse together, walking barefoot through snow that was often knee-deep, wearing only thin cotton dresses that provided no protection against temperatures that regularly dropped below zero. Thomas Whitmore attempted on several occasions to prevent his daughters from venturing outside during these dangerous conditions, but he discovered that any effort to restrain them resulted in consequences that terrified the entire household. When he tried to bar the door, the wooden planks would begin to vibrate and emit low humming sounds that grew progressively louder until he removed the obstruction. If he attempted to physically prevent their departure, all three girls would stare at him with expressions of such profound sadness that he found himself overwhelmed by emotions of loss and grief that seemed to emanate from somewhere beyond his own experience. The triplets would spend approximately 2 hours in the woods each morning, returning to the farmhouse just as the sun began to rise above the eastern ridge. They never showed any signs of discomfort from their exposure to the brutal weather conditions, and their feet bore no evidence of contact with snow or frozen ground. Their cotton dresses remained completely dry despite walking through deep snow, and their skin maintained a healthy warmth that defied explanation. When questioned about their morning activities, the sisters would simply explain that they were attending to important matters that required their presence in the forest. Elizabeth Porter, whose cabin sat close enough to the Whitmore property to observe their movements, became deeply concerned about what she witnessed during these daily excursions. Through her bedroom window, she could see 3 glowing figures moving among the trees, but the illumination surrounding the triplets was unlike anything produced by lanterns or torches. The light appeared to emanate from the sisters themselves, creating a soft blue radiance that extended several feet in all directions and seemed to pulse in rhythm with their movements. More disturbing was her observation that the 3 figures often appeared to be floating several inches above the snow-covered ground, moving through the forest with a smoothness that suggested they were not subject to the same physical limitations that affected normal human locomotion. During one particularly severe blizzard in January, Elizabeth witnessed an event that convinced her that the Whitmore sisters possessed abilities that transcended human understanding. A massive oak tree, weakened by the weight of accumulated ice and snow, crashed down across the path the triplets used for their morning journeys. The fallen trunk was far too large for 3 young women to move, even under normal circumstances, and the storm conditions made any outdoor activity extremely dangerous for ordinary people. Elizabeth watched through her frost-covered window as the 3 sisters approached the obstacle, joining hands in a small circle beside the fallen tree. The blue light surrounding them intensified dramatically, becoming so bright that Elizabeth had to shield her eyes from the radiance. When she was able to look again, the massive oak had been moved completely off the path and positioned upright against a nearby hillside, as if it had never fallen at all. The sisters continued their journey without pause, moving through the storm as easily as if they were walking through a peaceful meadow on a calm spring morning. The strange morning rituals were only the beginning of increasingly unusual behavior that characterized the triplets throughout the winter months. Neighbors began reporting that the sisters seemed to possess knowledge of events before they occurred, often appearing at homes where emergencies would develop within hours of their visits. Martha Henderson later recalled that Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel had arrived at her cabin on a Tuesday afternoon, offering to help with household tasks, despite her insistence that no assistance was needed. That evening, her husband Jonathan suffered a severe injury when his axe slipped while splitting firewood, and the sisters were still present to provide immediate medical attention that likely saved his life. Similar incidents occurred throughout Cedar Hollow during the winter months, with the triplets appearing at various households shortly before accidents, illnesses, or other crises developed. Their timing was so precise that some community members began to suspect the sisters might be causing the problems they seemed so eager to solve. However, careful observation by several families revealed that the triplets' interventions always prevented more serious consequences and never resulted in harm to the people they assisted. The most disturbing development occurred in February when multiple witnesses reported seeing the sisters in different locations simultaneously, engaging in separate activities that would have been impossible for 3 individuals to accomplish. James Morrison observed all 3 triplets helping his pregnant wife during a difficult labor that lasted most of one afternoon, while at the same time, William Carter saw the identical sisters assisting with emergency repairs to his barn roof after a section collapsed under heavy snow. Both events occurred during the same 4-hour period, and both men insisted that the sisters who helped them remained present throughout the entire duration of their respective emergencies. Dr. Elias Thornton returned to Cedar Hollow in March, drawn by reports of these impossible simultaneous appearances. His investigation revealed that the phenomenon had become increasingly common, with reliable witnesses documenting instances where the triplets were observed in as many as 5 different locations during the same time period. The sisters who appeared to different families were identical in every physical detail and demonstrated the same unusual abilities, but each group seemed to possess complete knowledge of events occurring at all the other locations where their counterparts were active. The doctor's attempts to understand this multiplication effect led to his discovery of what he termed the most scientifically impossible aspect of the entire mystery. When he used a specially designed measurement device to record the weight and vital signs of the triplets during one of their community visits, he found that each sister registered only 1/3 of the normal readings expected for healthy young women of their age and size. Their combined weight, heart rate, and other physiological indicators totaled exactly what would be expected from a single person, suggesting that their individual existence was somehow distributed across multiple physical forms. During his extended stay in Cedar Hollow, Dr. Thornton also documented the sisters' ability to communicate across vast distances without any visible or audible means of transmission. He observed Sarah providing detailed information about events occurring at a farm 5 miles away, describing specific activities that Rebecca and Rachel were supposedly witnessing in real time. When he sent a rider to verify these reports, every detail proved to be completely accurate, despite the impossibility of normal communication across such distances during the winter weather conditions. The physician's most unsettling discovery involved the sisters' relationship with the natural world around them. Plants that had died during the harsh winter would begin showing signs of new growth within hours of the triplets' presence, even in the depths of February when no vegetation should have been capable of recovery. Animals that had been near death from cold or hunger would regain their strength and vitality after brief contact with the sisters, often displaying unusual behaviors that suggested enhanced intelligence or awareness beyond normal animal capabilities. Dr. Thornton's scientific instruments detected energy emanations from the triplets that registered unlike anything he had measured from other human subjects. The readings suggested that each sister was somehow connected to sources of power that extended far beyond their individual physical forms, drawing from reservoirs of energy that seemed to be distributed throughout the natural environment of Cedar Hollow. His attempts to trace these energy patterns led him to the ancient burial ground discovered the previous year, where his instruments recorded similar emanations emanating from deep underground. The doctor's investigation of the burial site revealed that the mysterious stone markers were arranged in patterns that precisely corresponded to the energy signatures he had detected around the triplets. The symbols carved into the rocks appeared to represent some form of communication or record-keeping system, but their meaning remained completely beyond his ability to interpret. More disturbing was his discovery that the energy readings from the burial ground intensified significantly during the early morning hours when the sisters conducted their daily forest rituals, suggesting a direct connection between their activities and whatever forces emanated from the ancient site. As spring approached and the winter's harsh grip on Cedar Hollow began to loosen, the phenomena surrounding the Whitmore triplets intensified rather than diminishing. The sisters' morning excursions extended to longer periods, sometimes lasting until well past sunrise, and witnesses reported seeing the blue light that surrounded them becoming visible even during daylight hours. The number of simultaneous appearances increased dramatically, with reports of the triplets being observed in dozens of locations throughout southeastern Ohio during single days. The growing intensity of these manifestations began to create serious concern among Cedar Hollow's residents, many of whom felt that their community was becoming the center of forces beyond human understanding or control. Several families made plans to relocate to other areas, fearing that continued exposure to the unexplained phenomena might have consequences that could not be predicted or prevented. The stage was being set for events that would transform the mystery of the Whitmore sisters from a local curiosity into something that would challenge the fundamental understanding of life, death, and the nature of human existence itself. Spring of 1845 brought with it a series of events that would forever alter my understanding of what separates the living from the dead. As the snow melted and revealed the landscape that had been hidden beneath winter's grip, the people of Cedar Hollow discovered that their community had undergone changes that defied every natural law they had previously accepted as immutable truth. The first indication that something fundamental had shifted came when farmers began preparing their fields for spring planting. Every piece of land that bordered the Whitmore property showed signs of cultivation that no human hands could have accomplished during the harsh winter months. Furrows had been carved with mathematical precision across acres of farmland, despite the ground having been frozen solid for months. Seeds had been planted in perfectly straight rows, with spacing that demonstrated a level of agricultural knowledge that surpassed anything available to frontier farmers in southeastern Ohio. Benjamin Crawford, whose 40-acre farm shared a boundary line with the Whitmore property, discovered that his entire wheat field had been prepared for planting, while he had been confined to his cabin by illness throughout the month of March. The work had been completed with such expertise that his expected harvest promised to be larger than anything he had achieved through his own efforts over 15 years of farming the land. More mysteriously, the tools used for this cultivation were nowhere to be found, and no human footprints marked the soft earth despite the obvious evidence of recent human activity. When Benjamin attempted to thank the Whitmore family for their assistance, Thomas appeared genuinely confused by the suggestion that his daughters had been responsible for the work. The older man explained that his girls had continued their daily morning excursions throughout the winter, but they never carried farming implements and had never shown any interest in agricultural activities, beyond helping with simple household garden tasks. Margaret Whitmore confirmed that her daughters returned from their forest walks each day, carrying nothing but occasional bundles of herbs or winter berries, never the tools that would be necessary for large-scale field preparation. Dr. Thornton's return to Cedar Hollow in April allowed him to investigate these agricultural mysteries with scientific methods that revealed even more disturbing aspects of the triplets' influence on their environment. His measurements of soil composition in mysteriously cultivated fields showed mineral concentrations that were completely inconsistent with the known geology of the region. The earth contained trace elements typically found hundreds of miles away, suggesting that the soil itself had been transformed or replaced through processes that conventional agriculture could not explain. More unsettling was his discovery that plants growing in these modified fields demonstrated growth rates that exceeded normal botanical development by factors that should have been impossible. Seeds planted in early April had sprouted and developed to stages typically requiring weeks of growth within merely days of germination. The vegetation showed characteristics of multiple different climates, with some plants displaying adaptations typically found in warmer southern regions while others exhibited features associated with northern mountain environments. The doctor's detailed botanical surveys revealed that the Whitmore property itself had become a repository for plant species that had never been documented in Ohio, flowers that belonged to desert climates bloomed alongside vegetables native to tropical regions, while trees that should have required decades to reach maturity stood fully grown where saplings had existed the previous autumn. The entire landscape seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of geography and climate, creating an environment that supported life forms from across the entire North American continent. During his extended observations, Dr. Thornton documented the triplets' interactions with this transformed environment in ways that challenged every principle of botanical science he had studied during his formal education. The sisters could encourage specific plants to bloom or fruit by simply placing their hands near the vegetation, directing natural processes with precision that suggested complete understanding of complex biological systems. They demonstrated knowledge of medicinal properties that allowed them to create treatments for ailments that conventional medicine could not address, combining plant materials in ways that produced effects far beyond what should have been possible with frontier remedies. The most remarkable aspect of their botanical abilities became apparent when Dr. Thornton observed them creating entirely new varieties of plants by bringing different species into contact with each other. Through processes that appeared to involve the same blue energy that surrounded them during their morning forest excursions, the triplets could combine characteristics from multiple plants to create hybrid varieties that possessed properties from several different parent species. These new creations consistently demonstrated enhanced healing capabilities, improved nutritional value, or other beneficial traits that made them superior to any known natural varieties. As word of these agricultural and botanical miracles spread beyond Cedar Hollow, the Whitmore sisters began attracting visitors from throughout southeastern Ohio who sought their assistance with problems that conventional solutions could not address. Farmers facing crop failures brought samples of diseased plants, hoping the triplets could restore their fields to productivity. Families dealing with mysterious illnesses traveled long distances to request treatments that combined the sisters' unusual healing abilities with their access to plant medicines that seemed to transcend normal herbal knowledge. The increasing number of visitors created opportunities for Dr. Thornton to observe the triplets' abilities under more controlled conditions, leading to discoveries that pushed his understanding of human capability into realms he had never imagined possible. During one afternoon, more than 20 people had gathered at the Whitmore farm, seeking various forms of assistance. He witnessed all three sisters simultaneously treating different patients, while maintaining what appeared to be continuous communication with each other across distances that should have prevented normal verbal or visual contact. Sarah worked with a young child suffering from a persistent fever that had resisted all conventional treatments, using a combination of plant extracts and direct physical contact that seemed to transfer energy from her body to the patient. At the same time, Rebecca assisted an elderly man whose injured leg had refused to heal properly following a farming accident, applying treatments that visibly accelerated the natural healing process while the doctor watched. Rachel simultaneously prepared complex herbal remedies for several other visitors, demonstrating knowledge of pharmaceutical chemistry that exceeded what was available in most established medical schools. Throughout these concurrent activities, the three sisters displayed awareness of each other's work that suggested they were sharing a single consciousness distributed across their individual bodies. When Sarah needed a specific plant extract for her patient, Rebecca would prepare the required material without being asked, often beginning the preparation process before Sarah had identified the need. If Rachel required assistance with a particularly challenging case, both of her sisters would provide guidance while continuing their own treatments, offering suggestions and corrections as if they were observing her work directly. Dr. Thornton's attempts to understand this shared consciousness led him to conduct experiments that revealed the most scientifically impossible aspect of the triplets' existence. When he separated the sisters by distances that prevented normal communication, they continued to demonstrate perfect coordination in their activities and complete knowledge of each other's experiences. Sarah could describe in detail the patients that Rebecca was treating from inside the farmhouse, while Sarah herself worked with different people in the barn, providing information that she could not have obtained through any conventional means. The phenomenon extended beyond simple awareness of each other's immediate activities to include shared access to knowledge and memories that seemed to transcend individual experience. Each sister could recall events that had occurred to her siblings with the same clarity and detail as her own personal memories, suggesting that their individual identities were somehow components of a larger unified existence. They demonstrated collective knowledge that exceeded what any three individuals could have accumulated through normal learning processes, accessing information about subjects they had never studied and places they had never visited. During the summer months, the scope of the triplets' abilities expanded to include influences that extended far beyond their immediate physical presence. Farmers throughout the region began reporting that their crops were developing unusual characteristics that improved yield and quality despite no direct contact with the Whitmore sisters. Livestock showed enhanced health and productivity, with animals developing resistance to diseases that typically caused significant losses in frontier farming operations. The beneficial effects seemed to radiate outward from Cedar Hollow, creating a zone of agricultural prosperity that extended for dozens of miles in all directions. Dr. Thornton's investigation of this expanding influence revealed that the energy signatures he had previously detected around the triplets were somehow propagating through underground networks that connected with the ancient burial ground and extended throughout the surrounding countryside. His instruments detected similar emanations at locations dozens of miles away, suggesting that the sisters' abilities were not limited to their immediate vicinity, but could affect conditions across vast geographic areas through mechanisms that conventional science could not explain. The doctor's mapping of these energy networks revealed patterns that corresponded to underground water sources, mineral deposits, and natural geological formations in ways that suggested the triplets were somehow accessing and utilizing natural forces that existed beneath the surface of the earth. The ancient burial ground appeared to serve as a focal point for these underground connections, with energy pathways radiating outward like the spokes of a massive wheel that encompassed much of southeastern Ohio. As autumn approached, the phenomena surrounding the Whitmore sisters intensified to levels that began to attract attention from academic and religious authorities beyond the local region. Professor Marcus Wellington from Ohio University traveled to Cedar Hollow in September, bringing with him sophisticated instruments designed to measure electromagnetic and other energy phenomena that might explain the unusual reports he had received. His initial skepticism quickly transformed into profound concern as his equipment detected energy patterns that exceeded the capabilities of his instruments to accurately measure or analyze. Professor Wellington's attempts to document the triplets' abilities using photographic techniques resulted in images that defied explanation through conventional understanding of light and chemistry. Photographs taken of the sisters during their daily activities showed multiple overlapping figures where only 3 individuals should have appeared, suggesting that their physical forms somehow existed in several states simultaneously. The blue energy that witnesses consistently reported appeared in the photographs as complex patterns of light that seemed to connect the triplets to their surrounding environment in ways that indicated deep integration with natural forces. The professor's collaboration with Dr. Thornton led to experiments that revealed the sisters could manipulate fundamental physical properties in ways that challenged basic principles of physics and chemistry. They demonstrated the ability to alter the temperature of objects through direct contact, changing ice to water or water to vapor without any apparent heat source. They could modify the chemical composition of materials, transforming one substance into another through processes that appeared to involve the same energy manipulation that characterized their healing and agricultural abilities. More disturbing were observations that the triplets could influence the behavior of time itself within limited areas around their presence. Clocks and other timepieces would run faster or slower when near the sisters, with the degree of alteration seeming to correspond to the intensity of the blue energy that surrounded them. Plants would age weeks or months within hours when exposed to concentrated doses of this energy, while other vegetation would appear to reverse its aging process, returning to earlier stages of development despite the natural progression of seasons. The academic investigation attracted the attention of religious authorities, who viewed the phenomena as potentially supernatural in nature, raising questions about whether the triplets' abilities represented divine intervention, demonic influence, or something else entirely beyond conventional theological understanding. Reverend Coleman found his own faith challenged by observations that seemed to contradict fundamental Christian teachings about the nature of life, death, and divine power. The sisters' abilities appeared to transcend the boundaries between sacred and secular, creating effects that could be interpreted as miraculous but occurred through mechanisms that seemed to operate according to unknown natural laws rather than divine intervention. As winter approached once again, the intensity of the phenomena surrounding the Whitmore triplets reached levels that would precipitate events so extraordinary that they would force everyone in Cedar Hollow to confront the possibility that the boundaries between life and death were far more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. The stage was set for discoveries that would prove some aspects of human existence extend far beyond the physical realm into territories where science and faith converge in ways that challenge everything we believe about the nature of reality itself. The preparations for what would become the most significant winter in Cedar Hollow's history began with changes in the triplets' behavior that suggested they were anticipating events of unprecedented importance. Their daily forest excursions extended to longer periods, sometimes lasting from before dawn until well after sunset, and the blue energy that surrounded them became visible even to observers who had previously been unable to detect it. The ancient burial ground began emitting sounds that could be heard throughout the community. Low harmonic tones that seemed to emerge from deep underground and continued without interruption for days at a time. These developments created an atmosphere of expectation and unease that pervaded Cedar Hollow as residents prepared for a winter that promised to bring revelations about the nature of existence that would forever change their understanding of life, death, and the mysterious forces that govern the transition between these states of being. The crisis that would forever change our understanding of human existence began on the night of December 21st, 1845, when the winter solstice brought with it phenomena that defied every natural law I had previously accepted as absolute truth. I had been staying at the Porter cabin, conducting my final observations of the Whitmore sisters before returning to my practice in Columbus, when Elizabeth woke me just after midnight with reports that the entire sky above Cedar Hollow was glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with sounds emerging from the ancient burial ground. Through the frost-covered window, I witnessed what I can only describe as a transformation of the very fabric of reality itself. The aurora-like lights that danced across the winter sky were unlike any natural phenomenon I had studied during my years of scientific research. The illumination shifted through colors that seemed to exist beyond the normal spectrum of human vision, creating patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose rather than random atmospheric disturbance. More disturbing was the realization that the lights appeared to be responding to activities taking place on the ground below, intensifying and shifting in direct correlation with movements I could observe near the Whitmore farmhouse. The three sisters stood in the center of their snow-covered yard, their arms raised toward the celestial display above them, and the blue energy that had always surrounded them during their mysterious activities now blazed with an intensity that made them visible from miles away. They were no longer simply three young women engaging in unusual behavior, but had become conduits for forces that seemed to connect the earth beneath our feet with cosmic energies that existed far beyond our small farming community in southeastern Ohio. Dr. Thornton arrived at the Porter cabin within minutes of the phenomenon beginning, having observed the same extraordinary display from his temporary quarters at the Henderson farm. Together, we ventured outside despite the bitter cold, drawn by scientific curiosity that overcame our natural caution about approaching something so obviously beyond normal human experience. The sounds emerging from the burial ground had evolved from the low harmonic tones that had characterized recent weeks into what could only be described as voices singing in languages that neither of us could identify, yet somehow conveyed meanings that penetrated directly into our consciousness, without requiring linguistic understanding. As we approached the Whitmore property, the intensity of the energy surrounding the triplets became almost overwhelming, creating physical sensations that suggested our bodies were being exposed to forces that human physiology was not designed to withstand. The air itself seemed to vibrate with power that made breathing difficult, and both Dr. Thornton and I experienced sensations of weightlessness that suggested the normal gravitational forces were being altered by whatever the sisters were channeling through their coordinated activities. The most alarming discovery came when we realized that the triplets were no longer touching the ground beneath their feet, but were suspended several feet above the snow-covered earth, rotating slowly in a formation that created geometric patterns in the air around them. Their individual identities seemed to be merging into a single entity that existed across multiple physical forms, with energy streams connecting them in ways that made it impossible to determine where one sister ended and another began. Dr. Thornton's instruments, which he had brought along hoping to document whatever unusual activity might occur during the winter solstice, began registering readings that exceeded their designed capacity to measure. The energy emanations from the triplets were so intense that several of his devices actually melted despite the freezing temperature, and the electromagnetic disturbances prevented his other equipment from functioning normally. We were witnessing phenomena that transcended the boundaries of known science, entering realms where conventional measurement and analysis became meaningless. The transformation of the sisters continued throughout the night, with their physical forms becoming increasingly translucent as the energy surrounding them intensified. By 3 o'clock in the morning, they appeared more as beings of pure light than as human women, though their individual personalities remained distinct enough that we could still identify Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel within the unified entity they were becoming. Their voices, when they spoke, seemed to come from everywhere at once, creating harmonics that resonated through the ground beneath our feet and the air around us. What they told us during those extraordinary hours challenged everything I had previously believed about the nature of life and death. The triplets explained that they existed as guardians appointed to maintain balance between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, serving as bridges that allowed beneficial energies to flow between these normally separate states of existence. Their unusual birth during the thunderstorm had marked them as vessels chosen to fulfill this cosmic responsibility, and their gradual development of supernatural abilities represented preparation for a transformation that would enable them to serve their appointed purpose more effectively. The ancient burial ground, they revealed, was not simply a repository for indigenous peoples who had once inhabited the region, but served as a gateway through which souls could pass between different states of existence. The stone markers were not grave markers in any conventional sense, but rather focusing devices that helped channel and direct the energies necessary to maintain this interdimensional passage. The triplets' daily forest excursions had been pilgrimages to this sacred site, where they received guidance and power from entities that existed beyond normal human perception. Their ability to appear in multiple locations simultaneously was not an illusion or trick, but represented their true nature as beings who existed partially outside the normal constraints of physical reality. Each sister was simultaneously an individual personality and a component of a larger unified consciousness that could manifest itself wherever their services were needed. Their healing abilities, agricultural miracles, and other supernatural talents were expressions of their access to life forces that flowed between the realm of the living and the domain of the dead. As dawn approached on December 22nd, the intensity of the phenomena surrounding the triplets reached a crescendo that would culminate in their complete transformation from human beings into something that transcended mortal existence entirely. The aurora-like lights in the sky began to concentrate into beams that connected directly with the sisters' elevated forms, creating columns of energy that seemed to extend infinitely upward into the cosmos. The sounds from the burial ground evolved into what could only be described as a cosmic symphony, with harmonies that suggested the participation of countless voices from realms beyond human understanding. Dr. Thornton and I watched in amazement and terror as the triplets' physical forms began to fade away entirely, replaced by pure energy that maintained their essential personalities while freeing them from the limitations of flesh and blood. Their final words to us, spoken in voices that seemed to come from the very fabric of reality itself, promised that their transformation would enable them to serve Cedar Hollow and the surrounding region more effectively than had ever been possible during their human existence. The climax of this extraordinary night came when the three sisters merged completely into a single brilliant point of light that rose slowly into the sky before suddenly expanding into a radiant explosion that illuminated the entire landscape for hundreds of miles in all directions. The energy release was so intense that it temporarily blinded both Dr. Thornton and myself, and when our vision returned, the triplets had vanished entirely, leaving behind only 3 sets of clothing, lying in the snow where they had been suspended moments before. The immediate aftermath of this transformation brought changes to Cedar Hollow. That confirmed the sisters' promises about their continued influence, despite their apparent death. The aurora-like lights continued to appear in the sky above the community on a regular basis, though never again with the intensity we had witnessed during the winter solstice. The beneficial effects on agriculture and livestock that had characterized the region during the triplets' human existence continued, and actually intensified, suggesting that their supernatural abilities had been enhanced rather than diminished by their transformation. More significantly, residents of Cedar Hollow began reporting encounters with the sisters that proved their essential personalities had survived their physical transformation. These appearances were different from the multiple manifestations we had observed during their human existence, occurring as translucent figures that could communicate clearly but obviously existed in a state between life and death. The triplets continued to provide healing assistance, agricultural guidance, and other forms of help, but their interventions now carried an otherworldly quality that made it clear they were no longer bound by normal human limitations. Dr. Thornton's attempts to document these post-transformation encounters revealed that the sisters retained all their previous abilities while gaining access to knowledge and power that exceeded anything they had demonstrated during their human existence. They could appear to multiple people simultaneously across vast distances, provide detailed information about events occurring in distant locations, and offer guidance that demonstrated understanding of future developments that had not yet occurred. The most disturbing aspect of these continued manifestations was the gradual realization that the realization that the triplets' transformation had been only the beginning of changes that would affect the entire Cedar Hollow community. Other residents began displaying unusual abilities that seemed to be influenced by their exposure to the energies released during the sisters' metamorphosis. Children born in the months following December 21st showed enhanced healing capabilities, unusual intelligence, and sensitivities that suggested they could perceive aspects of reality that remained hidden from normal human awareness. The mystery deepened when Dr. Thornton's investigation revealed that similar transformations had occurred at other locations throughout history, always involving individuals who served as bridges between the realm of the living and the domain of the dead. Ancient texts from various cultures contained references to guardian spirits who maintained cosmic balance through their willingness to sacrifice human existence for the sake of serving higher purposes. The Whitmore sisters had apparently been part of an ancient tradition that connected human communities with supernatural forces that most people never suspected existed. The implications of these discoveries forced both Dr. Thornton and myself to completely reconsider our understanding of life, death, and the nature of human existence itself. The triplets' transformation had proven that consciousness could survive the dissolution of physical form, that individual personalities could merge while retaining their essential characteristics, and that the boundaries between different states of existence were far more permeable than conventional science or theology had ever acknowledged. As winter gave way to spring in 1846, the phenomena surrounding Cedar Hollow continued to evolve in ways that suggested the sisters' transformation had initiated changes that would affect the community for generations to come. The ancient burial ground became a site of ongoing supernatural activity, with energy emanations that could be detected by sensitive individuals from throughout the region. The agricultural miracles that had characterized the area during the triplets' human existence expanded to encompass innovations that seemed to anticipate future developments in farming technology by decades or even centuries. Most importantly, the continued appearances of Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel in their transformed state provided ongoing evidence that death was not the absolute ending that most people believed it to be, but rather a transition to a different form of existence that allowed for continued interaction with the world of the living under appropriate circumstances. Their story had become a bridge between the material and spiritual realms, offering proof that love, dedication, and willingness to serve others could transcend even the ultimate boundary of mortal death. The discovery that would provide the final piece of this impossible puzzle came 44 years later, when I returned to Cedar Hollow as an elderly physician to investigate reports that the abandoned Whitmore farmhouse had begun showing signs of supernatural activity that exceeded anything witnessed during the sisters' original transformation. Local residents reported seeing lights moving through the empty rooms, hearing voices singing the same harmonious melodies that had characterized the winter solstice of 1845, and observing 3 translucent figures tending to a garden that bloomed year-round despite Ohio's harsh seasonal changes. My investigation of the cellar beneath the farmhouse revealed the 3 empty coffins that had been prepared for the sisters following their disappearance. But more significantly, I discovered a hidden chamber that contained detailed records documenting their true nature and purpose. These documents, written in multiple languages including scripts that scholars later identified as belonging to ancient civilizations that had supposedly vanished thousands of years ago, revealed that Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel were part of an eternal cycle of guardians who appeared throughout history whenever the balance between life and death required intervention. The records indicated that similar transformations had occurred at regular intervals across different continents and cultures, always involving individuals who possess the unique combination of spiritual sensitivity and selfless dedication necessary to serve as bridges between the material and spiritual realms. The Whitmore sisters had been chosen before their birth to fulfill this cosmic responsibility, and their unusual abilities throughout their human existence had been preparation for their ultimate transformation into eternal guardians. Most remarkably, the documents revealed that their transformation was not permanent, but rather part of a cyclical process that would eventually allow them to return to human form when their guardianship duties were complete. The 3 empty coffins in the cellar were not evidence of death, but rather vessels waiting to receive the sisters when they chose to resume mortal existence. The ongoing supernatural phenomena in Cedar Hollow represented their continued presence, as they maintained their vigil over the community they had sworn to protect. Dr. Thornton's son, who had inherited his father's scientific curiosity along with detailed notes about the original investigation, joined me in documenting these final revelations. Together, we witnessed the sisters materializing in their translucent forms to explain that their mission in Cedar Hollow was nearing completion, and they would soon transition to other locations where their services were needed more urgently. The agricultural prosperity and enhanced spiritual awareness that characterized the region would continue as their permanent legacy to the community that had unknowingly hosted their earthly preparation. The sisters revealed that countless individuals throughout history had undergone similar transformations, serving as unseen guardians who maintained the delicate balance that prevented the realm of the dead from overwhelming the world of the living. Most humans remained unaware of these protectors, but their influence could be detected in regions where unexplained prosperity, unusual longevity, and enhanced spiritual sensitivity suggested the presence of forces beyond normal understanding. On my final night in Cedar Hollow, I witnessed the sisters performing what they described as their departure ceremony, a ritual that would transfer their protective influence to 3 newborn girls in the community who would eventually develop the abilities necessary to continue their work. The process involved the same brilliant display of lights and energy that had characterized their original transformation, but in reverse, as their accumulated power was channeled into the next generation of guardians who would serve the community. During the coming decades, the empty coffins disappeared during this final ceremony, replaced by 3 small saplings that the sisters planted in the farmhouse cellar before fading away for the last time. These trees, they explained, would grow to maturity over the following years and serve as focal points for the protective energies they were leaving behind. As long as the trees remained healthy, Cedar Hollow would continue to benefit from their supernatural guardianship even in their absence. The Whitmore farmhouse burned to the ground 3 days after my departure, destroyed by lightning during a storm that witnesses described as remarkably similar to the tempest that had accompanied the sisters' original birth. However, the cellar and the 3 saplings it contained survived completely undamaged, eventually growing into magnificent oak trees that became the centerpiece of a memorial garden established by grateful community members. Today, more than 40 years after witnessing these impossible events, I remain convinced that the Whitmore sisters prove the existence of realities that extend far beyond our normal understanding of life and death. Their story demonstrates that consciousness can transcend physical form, that individual dedication can serve purposes larger than personal survival, and that the boundaries between different states of existence are far more fluid than conventional science acknowledges. Science may struggle to explain their transformation, but the evidence of their continued influence suggests that some mysteries transcend the need for rational explanation. The 3 oak trees continue to thrive in what was once the Whitmore cellar, and visitors to Cedar Hollow still report sensing an atmosphere of peace and protection that seems to emanate from their presence. Perhaps most remarkably, the region continues to produce individuals with unusual healing abilities and spiritual sensitivities that suggest the sisters' legacy lives on through the community they chose to serve. Their story reminds us that reality contains depths and possibilities that we have barely begun to explore, and that the most profound truths often exist in the spaces between what we know and what we can imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.